Okay, hello everyone. My name is Verilou Mihailovic, and I am a Senior Director of Product Marketing here at AutoRABIT. And today's topic for the webinar is building a security culture for the Salesforce Development Pipeline. And I think that this is one of these things that is top of mind, especially with all of the news related to cybersecurity and the new regulations going in place, especially around the SEC, different regulations around the world, and people wanting to build build security into their development pipelines. So the main topic of discussion is the fact that errors can potentially threaten your business, and what what we need to change and need to enact in terms of the industry is enterprises need to start adopting low code security and having the same type of tooling that's available for custom app development, available for low code, or for platforms like Salesforce. This is especially important as Salesforce becomes mission critical for a lot of our industries, a lot of our companies. And it's a key driver of business. And the reason the things that are put at risk is the fact that Salesforce handles an enormous amount of sensitive data. There are complications and layers of intricacies around Salesforce metadata, which encodes roles, access controls, and permissions. And this includes a lot of capabilities for someone to introduce errors via metadata, potentially. And finally, having to correct these types of issues slows delivery and creates additional risk for compliance and security. Salesforce, in particular, requires specialized code analysis and security due to the fact that it's low code. And that's the number one most prevalent idea behind all of this webinar is the fact that with the decentralization that Salesforce offers, as well as the layers of very specific and nuanced architecture that promotes the capabilities of running fast, but also a lot of people having administrative capabilities and the ability to change your security posture. It requires a rethink. Um, Apex code allows for automatic executions. Dependencies are challenging. There are many layers that are nuanced. There is a complex sharing model and a sharing architecture available that's dissimilar to things that are available kind of in the custom app development. And one of the untalked about things is that the usage of APIs you're able to proliferate how many APIs, data hooks, webhooks that you're using throughout your code, which creates an attack surface that folks are really looking after and trying to get in. Some of the things that we at AutoRABIT are privileged to do is interact with our customers. And what we've found is as you introduce these errors and vulnerabilities, depending on where they're caught, how much time is required to fix. What our findings are, and based off of our time studies, is the fact that an error that gets introduced with early development costs 600 times more to fix in production throughout the development lifecycle. And one of the key things, and I know that everyone's probably been hearing and seeing these things, is that the total cost of an average data breach in the US is $9.05 million. And a lot of us might take a look at that and scoff at that number. The general issue, and there are a few notable examples, like Clorox recently paid $49 million in terms of containing the data breach that they had. Mega breaches can reach up into the almost $1 billion. The biggest challenges remain for once you have been breached is getting back into command and control of your systems. And this means that typically a breach is not detected for 270 days on average, which allows the infiltrator to land and spread. So depending on what layers of access and security you have, the perpetrator or vulnerability could have allowed the attacker to land and spread, which causes a lot of issues in terms of IT having to go after and restore systems to the last known good condition, which makes it very cost prohibitive. So these numbers that you see out in industry when they say, the average breach is, $9 million, $5 million, or whatnot, it's about the cost of containing and all the related IT systems that have to be evaluated. So where we're going today is we really want to focus in on building a development culture. And what you have to focus in on is really thinking about data security, Salesforce app development, talking about APIs and communities. And then we're going to take a deep dive of how do you actually instrument and build security into your pipelines and shift left towards DevSecOps for real. And this topic is really interesting, where everyone is looking to do it, but not everyone knows how to get started. So what we're going to do is talk about creating a lexicon of key items that we need to understand, and then building the DevSecOps culture into the pipelines. And finally, we're going to be finishing off with offers for you / question and answer if you have anything. As we go through, please use the question functionality. Feel free to throw in any questions, and I will be doing my best to answer them as we go through the presentation, as well as circling back at the end. So let's get started. For Salesforce data security, Salesforce has a gigantic challenge around data classification in the fact that it's manually done. There is no way to calculate the risk associated with Salesforce data. And the burden falls upon the developers and the administrators of Salesforce of understanding what is PII data, what is potentially secret data, what is data that you can't share with others. So being able to classify this risk, it is incredibly important for IT as well as policymakers to understand what level of security does your data require. And this hinders, without this data classification, it is very difficult to, without investing a lot of time, classify the data manually to understand if you are compliant for things such as GDPR, SOX compliance, and different policies that your company has to abide by. And for Salesforce, once this data classification challenge is tackled, there are 4 levels of individual records, all the way from an org to an individual record that you can classify. And this model provides you the ability to secure organization data for 4 levels. So at the highest level, organizational level security, such as trusted IP ranges, and are able to set up organizational wide security policies. Then going a level deeper, objects, you can use profiles within your Salesforce organizations to enforce access privilege on the object level for a domain or for provisioning specific accounts on a given profile. Then going into the field level security on a given object, you can restrict fields in particular for particular screens and hide these from particular set of folks, as well as provide read write permission levels on the field level. For individual records, you can customize access and share records for each profile depending on the specific roles and criteria. So you have quite a bit of power in terms of setting up the configurations around security, but making sure that data is properly classified is absolutely instrumental in getting started on your security journey of building security into your pipelines. And then we're going to talk about Salesforce application development security. And here we're going to be talking about some of the most common vulnerabilities that, as you're coding or doing app development across Salesforce, what are some issues that you might be experiencing? So in this scenario, it's something called XSS attacks, which is cross-site scripting. And in this scenario, apps that use dynamic web page content could potentially open up users to compromise their interactions to a security attacker. And in this case, those who that attacker can take control of the session and potentially execute malicious code. And this is particularly challenging because XSS requires no authentication, no user action, which makes this a genuine vulnerability. And this is really interesting in terms of being, accidentally using this in your code is quite frequent, and just making sure that you control this and understand what is happening. Then a very similar scenario where this is a cross-site request for forgery. And in this scenario, apps using dynamic web page content, very similar, can be compromised by attackers who could then incite a user to perform unintended actions to enable their malicious motives. The difference between XSS and cross-site request for forgery is that a user in cross-site request for forgery performs one or multiple actions in this scenario, and then limiting the damage to the extent of which the actions are performed. In contrast, in cross-site scenario, the user is entirely unaware of the attack is occurring. Salesforce typically protects against such scenarios by implementing a anti-cross-site request forgery token and prevents skip execution until the token is validated every time. But it is not good practice to include these types of code, this type of code inside your pipeline. And then potentially security leakages. Taking a look at your code, using the system debug is a big thing, where you can potentially expose PII data. Here we can see that the current record ID is being exposed with the system debug. Usually references are for debugging purposes, and then can potentially often remain in production code. And this is a potential violation because sometimes usernames, passwords, contact information, PII may be stored in unsecured locations and making them potentially accessible by unauthorized users. And the biggest challenge is, unless it's hashed, thinking about this, things might be open, clear text. And then talking about the permissions vulnerability. So taking here, for example, user U, this rule here checks for access permissions before running a SOC wall or a different type of operation, where it is really important to have protected resources, and making sure that you are checking of if the user has the potential privileges to be able to do this actions. One of the things that is challenging under Salesforce is the fact that the concept of least privilege, of making sure that you assign correct user profiles so folks have just enough permissions to do their intended tasks, is a little bit difficult and needs to be actively managed to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities attached with somebody having a super admin access with the capability of having a read write for tons of potential data. Going into a phishing attack, it's a phishing attack. It checks against user controlled locations and redirects. So in this case, there is an open redirect vulnerability when an application allows a user to control or redirect or forward to another URL. So if the app does not validate or the untrusted user input, an attacker could supply a illegitimate URL or domain, which goes to an attacker's phishing site. So this is really important to have this under control, especially if you are using community user portals, where this can be potentially redirected to a nefarious location with potential compromise from the end user. And then taking a look at a SOC injection, which is as most of us know, is the database query language in Apex, which is SOC, which is similar to SQL. And this security measure is to protect query injections in SOC, where an attacker can unintentionally modify unvalidated user input into queries for malicious intent. So this is key to make sure that we close this down. And then moving on to duplications, just making sure that different variable fields should not have public access, and making sure that this is really brought under control, depending on who has read-write, review-only access. And then taking a look at one of the things that is probably most prevalent in the news sources is talking about Salesforce API and communities. As we've seen, there have been several reports from Brian on Krebs on the Salesforce communities being potentially sources of data leakage. And having the API, there are many capabilities of integrating Salesforce with third-party applications to improve productivity and do other things across your entire company, which exposes you to potential risks. So for the data API and communities, the Salesforce platform is flexible and open to its functionality for developers and social communities alike. So what needs to be done to be able to contain these is just making sure that you enable permissions for specific roles and enforce these permissions as API only, allow only read access unless completely necessary. As well as the enforcement of password policies, locations restrictions, and other roles inside Salesforce to really make sure that you're not getting attacked from a different geographic location. Making sure that we are whitelisting apps on a case-to-case basis and periodically reviewing to revoke access to dormant apps. One of the key ways that attackers with malicious intent love finding dormant apps with high levels of privilege to exploit. Allowing users the least level of privilege and selectively granting higher privileges on a case-to-case basis. And this is a familiar concept to those of us in IT, where the only way to protect from attacker is to have users request for elevated privileges and then taking those away once the job has been done or an action has been completed. And ultimately, one of the key things is if you can enforce authentication across your communities, it is absolutely vital to put those into practice. So now we'll talk about how to build security into your pipelines. So here at AutoRABIT, we strongly believe that in shifting left and building security into your capabilities, and that involves from your entire development cycle into moving into production. And we have our leading tool called CodeScan, which identifies both bugs and vulnerabilities and helps save time by moving it to the individual user and validating it across the entire development pipeline. And with CodeScan, we really are looking at more so than the code vulnerabilities, but looking into technical debt, understanding your security vulnerabilities that might potentially expose data, and then vulnerabilities that compromise access controls or degrade least privilege. There are certain indicators that provide both a understanding of performance and quality that can really impact the level of tech debt that's going into production. And with AutoRABIT, we focus on increasing feature speed and delivery based off the fact that you deliver high quality code into production that's not filled with any vulnerabilities. We save tons of time on code reviews with an automated review process. On average, we take down a review that might take 60 minutes down to 1 minute. Automatically integrated with your CI/CD pipeline within our platform. In terms of tech debt, we have thousands of rules, 600 rules specifically looking at tech debt, being able to detect code vulnerabilities directly. And ultimately, what our tool gives the capability of is making sure that you can integrate within your pipeline. We can integrate within your IDE, however you are looking at doing it. And then we have all the standards required for doing safe code analysis. And then ultimately, the key thing that separates us from the rest of the market is that we are compatible with all Salesforce languages, including metadata, Apex, Visualforce, Lightning Web Components, flows, and process builders. So we really have an advantage in terms of the market of what we have the capabilities of doing. So we have incredible reviews both in the App Exchange and overall in the market, and we have the highest coverage across Salesforce specific languages. So allowing us to be really experts in making sure that you are protected against data vulnerabilities, code security, and as well as your APIs. And we have a quick example here where working with a customer that we did a cost study where we saved $3.1 million a year in productivity, around 35 devs that are using across many of their instances. So we managed to find a cost savings of $3.1 million to really implement systematic change and move towards shifting left in security. All right, cool. So we're coming towards the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw in some questions here just right now. So let's start off with, all right, so the number one question is, how is CodeScan different than SonarQube? So we have the ability to implement security gates and quality gates in terms of the pipeline process, as well as our depth and breadth of coverage within the rule set that is specifically related to Salesforce. So we have close to 1,800 to 1,900 rules, and I think with our latest release, we'll be opening it up in terms of our capabilities of delivering analysis across the Salesforce ecosystem of applications and languages that are used there. And then secondly, we actually have a enterprise grade product, which has RBAC capabilities of meeting the strictest InfoSec requirements. So we have the capabilities of integrating into whatever is your enterprise pipeline, as well as really working closely with your capabilities, the requirements from your InfoSec requirements. All right, so we answered some questions. One question is, as you go through security vulnerabilities, the biggest pushback I get is how easy is it to exploit vulnerabilities such as SOC or XSS attacks? Is there a way to quantify how easy to exploit vulnerabilities in CodeScan is? So we have a capability there, which is something called related to magnitude of impact and a combined security score. So once CodeScan has run, or we can run it across your production instance, we can generate a report that grades your all the vulnerabilities that are found there in terms of severity. And then the severity index that can be combined in terms of the complication of your code base, the length of code, and we spit out a number that can give you an indicator of how your combined code is vulnerable to an attack. So there are certain measures in terms of severity and impact of the issues that gives you an indicator of how this can potentially impact your code base and give you a good answer for folks that are asking how easy it is to exploit the code that has been developed. Oh, and somebody has asked, we have Sneak today? Does your tool scan more than Sneak can for Salesforce? Yes. So Sneak is a very good tool used across many other industries. For us specifically, we have chosen to really focus in on low code, which requires a little bit more of an in-depth look in terms of understanding how the sharing rules work, the specific languages. So there's 18 languages across Salesforce, as well as understanding the unique API capabilities of Salesforce. So we have much more depth and breadth than Sneak does, specifically around our low code capabilities. And would love to have a chat if you are interested of showing you live. All right. Somebody has asked if we already use SonarQube, can you comment on the benefits of extension of SonarQube on top of with CodeScan that come out of the box? So we get this question often. So we have quite a bit of capabilities around the number one differentiator that we find is Salesforce metadata. So we have a comprehensive list of Salesforce metadata rules that are missed typically by the other solutions available. We have components around Lightning Web Components. We have extensions into flows. So the Sonar Q does a good job around the basics and the large breadth of Salesforce languages, but really taking a look at metadata where a lot of the configurations and potential vulnerabilities happen, and then taking a look at going into the security rules around configuration management and enforcing least privilege. And then lastly, we believe that we have the best tool in the market that allows us integration into your pipeline and meeting you where you are. So from the perspective of having a enterprise ready tool that can incorporate into your DevSecOps story, we have the platform there for you, as long with the extension with the AutoRABIT platform with our DevOps and our data backup capabilities. All right, cool. In the last 3 minutes, I just would like to show everyone a offer that we have. So we have two things to get you started. If anybody is interested, feel free to drop us a line here in the chat or send us an email afterwards where we have the ability to do an assessment with you on your current security posture. And what we do is we can offer this capability of understanding of where you are in terms of your security posture. And we can do a deep dive with you on specifically some of the vulnerabilities and show the impact and the severity that it can potentially have on your organization. And then we have a free code scan that you can sign up for online. And it's for developers and admins where you can scan over your code and get a output of what kind of tech debt do you have? What are some of the key vulnerabilities that have been identified? What are your top hitters? Identifying the complexity of your code and ultimately giving you a letter grade of where you are in relation to the rest of industry. All right, perfect. So what we'll be doing is we'll be sending you an email with a recording of this webinar. There is a tactical summit that we can hold with you, and then as well as having a free quick code scan. If you're looking to get started quickly, we can email that to you as well. So just wanted to say thank you for everyone. And if you have any questions, comments, feel free to send them in and we will do our best to get back to you. All right, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending our webinar.